Live streaming is on.
Okay, now we've got something. Now it says live. Okay, we are now live. So,
Actually, really.
we really are. Okay. So, let's start again. Welcome to the first episode of the Lee and Kai live show. Yay! All right. So today we're going to be talking about astrology. Yes, I'm Lee. That's Kai over there. And yeah, so let's start with the first question again. What is astrology?
Well,
sorry, if anybody doesn't know what's going on because they're watching it afterwards, we had a bit of a mess up with OBS, so we had to start the whole thing again. So we're doing it all again. All right. Sorry. What is astrology, Kai?
So, astrology literally means the study of the stars. Astro, stars, ology, study of. But when we're talking about astrology in modern times, it is one of the three pillars of Western magic. So it is the language, the symbolic codices that the vast majority of our historical sources for any occult system in the Western world is written in. So even if you don't want to study natal charts, or you don't want to know about personal psychological astrology, or you don't want to be an astrological magician, you still need to be conversant with the symbolic language in order to understand a huge host of references that are made across a variety of occult methods and tools.
Okay. We've cleared that one up now. All right. So the questions my daughter had. Why do the signs influence a person's personality?
So modern astrology, modern Western astrology is largely based in psychology. And it is focused on the psychology and the personality of the native. Native is the word we use for whoever's chart we're reading. And the rise of sun sign astrology in the 60s and 70s has made it very popular to refer to people as only their sun sign. You know, they're a Scorpio, she's a Capricorn, he's a Cancer, so on and so forth. But I find some of my clients are surprised when I do their charts and they find out they have all 12 signs. Everyone has all 12 signs. The sun is only in one of them at a time. And they have also at least 6 other planets, the moon and Mercury and Venus and Jupiter, so on and so forth. So everybody has everything in their chart. It's just arranged differently. Now, the sun is very important. The sun is a primary luminary. It's how we see ourselves. It's part of our identity. And so sun sign astrology makes sense because we can relate to it. The sun is probably the part of our chart that we know the best. So we often identify with it, but we don't usually identify very closely with sun sign astrology because it's simplified. It would mean there are only 12 types of people in the world. But we know that there's way more than that. So, there's more complexity there. There's more possibilities. So the signs influence everyone. And it's just the arrangement that is present at the time of birth. It's the imprint that was left on us by the universe at that time when we came into being, or when anything came into being, because astrology is not just for people. It's also the lens or the filter through which we view all the subsequent energies that we experience in the universe, because it's our imprint. It's how we relate to that flow of energy that we characterize through the symbolic language of astrology.
Okay. So, I mean, when we talk about astrology, it's not about just our star sign or our sun sign or our moon or our rising. It is a combination of all of the signs together. There's, as you say, just arranged differently, which creates the personality. But now, why do we focus so much on the rising sun and moon signs?
Well, they're the big three. They're the really important things. So our sun is how we see ourselves. The moon is our emotions, but it's also the other luminary. It's the other point of light in the chart. And really, when it comes to understanding astrology charts, it's all about light. Who sends light to who, and who blocks light from who, and where that energy is being sent, who's receiving it, that sort of thing. And then rising signs. The rising sign determines your house placements. So it makes this interlocking grid of signs and houses and starts in different places depending upon the rising, so that your grid, your framework upon which all of the objects are placed, or the planets, has this fundamental basis. And actually, sun sign astrology, modern pop sun sign astrology that you find in like newspaper columns or the little scrolls by the checkout, those are often based on rising signs, because everyone with the same rising sign will have the same house arrangement. So when we're looking at topics of life, your family or your career or your learning or your partners, those are determined by house placements. So it's making those predictions day by day are based on where the planets are in different houses.
Okay. Now, I mean, if we look at the sun sign and the moon sign, we can just, if I've got it right, the sun sign is determined by the placement of the sun in a particular zodiac, and the moon sign, the position of the moon in the particular zodiac. How is the rising sign determined?
So the rising sign, if you think about the sun rises every morning, right? It's over there in the east. There is a point where it breaks the horizon and you can now see the orb of the sun. And then it continues up overhead and so on and so forth. The rising sign is, if you look over to that point in the east at the moment of the chart, that is the sign that is visible there. And there's 30 degrees for each sign. So it lasts 4 hours or so, where we're looking at that point. So it's calculated by being the intersection of the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the path, or the zodiac band, the path that all of the planets travel, and the apparent rational plane, which is why we need longitude and latitude for astrology. If you take a spot on the globe and you do that tangent flat plane, we extend that out into space, and where that intersects different points in space determines several points on the chart, one of them being the ascendant and the descendant, just one's east and one's west.
Okay, all right. And again, with the rising moon and sun signs, as far as I know, the moon sign determines the emotional state of the person. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And the sun is the basic personality, really, isn't it?
The identity of the self. And
Right.
these cases, we're talking about nativities or natal astrology from a psychological perspective.
Okay.
These kinds of definitions that we're using, because there are different types of astrology and there are different traditions in astrology that look at different perspectives. So.
All right. Okay, now for something completely different. Mercury retrograde. Now, retrograde means that it's appearing to move in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how is something like Mercury retrograde determined, or I'm not really sure how to put this, to be honest with you, but I think you know what I mean. What is Mercury retrograde?
So retrograde doesn't happen to the sun and the moon, but it happens to all of the other planets, because the sun is at the center of the solar system and all the other planets are going around, right? We're all orbiting the sun. We are observing from one of those planets that's going around. So it's like we're all driving around on racetracks, right? And have you ever experienced driving next to a car on the highway and it doesn't seem like you're moving forward, it seems like they're falling backwards. It's kind of like that due to the point of observation. So,
Okay.
and what we're doing is observing it successively over a period of several nights and plotting these points as it moves through the sky. Okay. So relative to our position, we see it moving backwards because we're at certain points and we're rotating around each other in such a way that it looks to be going the wrong way. And what it happens in the sky as we watch it. So if this is our arc of the ecliptic and we watch a planet progress across there in the night sky, we will see retrograde go up like this and slow way down, and then it'll curve and go back over, and then it'll slow way down, and then it'll pick it up and go forward and trace it. So it makes this little loop-to-loop in the sky. So during that time, we have shadow periods that are underneath that backwards motion loop, right? It shadows that. So we see it go over the area, then it retraces its steps, and then it goes over the area again. This is just like when you get to the door and you realize you forgot your glasses. You have to go back through the house into the kitchen and get your glasses, and then all the way back to the door, right?
I do that often.
Same thing. You're going back and forth over an area. So Mercury retrograde we notice because it happens the most frequently. Mercury has the shortest orbital period of the planets that can go retrograde. So Mercury retrograde happens 3 or 4 times a year. And then further out, the retrograde periods are longer and less frequent because the planets are moving more slowly as compared to the sky. So the sun can't go retrograde because we're orbiting around it. It's not moving in the relative of astrology. We do know that it's moving. We calculate for fixed stars moving and that sort of thing. It just moves so slowly that we don't make adjustments very often. And the moon cannot go retrograde because it's going around us. So it's right with us, locked into that cycle. So it is an observation phenomenon that has to do with the super fun of math, that these objects are all moving at the same time, so it looks like it goes backwards.
All right. Okay, let's just go over to the chat quickly. Hello, Rosie. Hello, Sabrina. Hello, Elizabeth. She likes when I say her name. So, and Elizabeth says Mercury retrograde. The hell on earth to me. I am Gemini.
Oh, yeah.
Does it affect different signs differently?
Absolutely. So your natal chart or your birth chart determines the lens through which you relate to all of the energies in the world. People who have Mercury that is very important in their chart, for example, a Gemini where it rules their sun sign, or a Gemini rising where it rules their ascendant, are going to feel the energies of Mercury more intensely than someone who has a Mercury that really doesn't matter in their natal chart. Or also, there are retrograde natives. If you were born with a Mercury retrograde, then that seems normal to you. That's part of your imprint. So
that doesn't affect you as much.
Well, during retrograde, you can do all the things. And the rest of the time, it feels like Mercury retrograde does to other people because it's flipped. It's going the wrong way. So, and it totally depends on your own imprint, how you're going to feel and relate to the energies. Now, I'm a traditional astrologer, so I also understand the chart in such a way that not all parts are active all of the time. It changes over the span of our life, depending upon certain factors. So what might be very active and important before your Saturn return up until you're 30, afterwards may change significantly and no longer be an active part of your life. Or that point might happen somewhere else. There's a lot of factors involved. It's not just a return or a transit. So some people really experience Mercury retrograde. Some people don't notice it at all. And it has to do with what their native imprint is and how they feel those energies.
Okay. We're always talking about Mercury retrograde. What about, I mean, you said the other planets can also go into retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we talk about the other planets?
Probably because our lives are pretty dependent upon technology. And Mercury is in charge of communication. So that includes machines and computers and talking to other people. And when communication breaks down or goes the wrong way, we really notice it. But you can watch Jupiter retrograde cycles in the stock market. It's the areas of life you're paying attention to. Venus retrograde cycles sometimes coincide with the valuation of precious metals. So I know when I was working with a high-end gems dealer who bought and sold rubies and emeralds and that sort of thing, they watched Venus retrograde cycles very carefully as part of their business planning.
I should imagine Venus retrograde would also affect relationships.
Yeah, for a lot of people, Venus can be very important to relationships. But Venus is not just the planet of love. Venus is the planet of value and beauty. And not everybody has a Venus that says that a romantic relationship is the height of value and beauty.
Okay. All right, I'm going to get into a bit more difficult question now. I think I've asked you this before, actually, but I'm going to ask you again. The difference between the northern and southern hemisphere. Now, one thing that came up with some years back with you, Corvus, you mentioned the possibility that because the astrological system was created in the northern hemisphere with the northern stars, etc., that when we move to the southern hemisphere, if somebody's born in the southern hemisphere, they actually should switch their sign by 6 months, like we do with the seasons.
A lot of people do that, and a lot of people advocate for that. Really, I think the historical sources to go to for information about Southern Hemisphere astrology is Jyotish astrology or Indian astrology, because it's in the Southern Hemisphere. But the reason for that idea of rotating the signs 180 degrees has to do with the assigned symbolic meaning. So, for example, Aries is the start of the spring equinox in northern traditions and astrology. And there's a lot of meanings of Aries that are associated with spring and the weather and the season. And so those don't apply as well in the southern hemisphere because March is not spring. You know, it's not, March does not carry that energy. So what I do is when I'm reading for someone that is born in the southern hemisphere, any seasonal stuff, any energy currents that are determined that way, I move those 180 degrees. But I don't move several of the other things because there's still the point of observation rule. So standing, down on the Cape, if you look over to the east and that's the rising sign you see, then that's the rising sign. It's still that way. Yeah. So those seasonal things that are off because of the calendar mostly have to do with sun signs. Those I do move them, and I find it seems to work better for the people I'm interpreting for. But that isn't turning the chart 180 degrees either, because there's still plenty of things that I keep where they are.
Yeah, I think we've determined that it's no good just looking at the sun sign or just the moon sign or just the rising. You got to look at the whole chart really to get a good picture of what's going on.
Well, astrology is very relational. It's all about, where is this in relation to this? Where is this in relation? So trying to pull things out of that relational web of meaning, I don't think serves interpretation very well.
Mm. All right, now a topic that can elicit quite a lengthy, very lengthy discussion that could go on for years and years and a lifetime. Fate versus free will. Because, I mean, if we consider that at the time of our birth chart shows us exactly what's going to happen through the rest of our life, where does free will come in?
So this comes up a lot because the modern understanding of free will is I can do what I want, right?
Mm.
But can you really? Like, really, really? Can I just go be, a 16th century priest with a year in a monastery because I want to? Well, no, I really can't. I have to live in the 21st century.
Mm.
So I can't totally do what I want, right? So we don't have carte blanche free will. We are constrained by the circumstances of our birth, what time we were born, where we were born, what physical body we got, what circumstances we were born into, the condition of our parents and the people that we lived with as a child, the economic circumstances we were born into, physical disabilities that we inherited or didn't inherit, right? We cannot just will those to change.
Mm.
And that's what astrology describes, the circumstances of your birth.
But does it go beyond that into what career path you should go into and things like that? The smaller choices in life, really.
There's a lot of choices in life. There absolutely is. And modern astrology approaches the idea of the natal chart as a psychological imprint. Just very similar to the same way we have other types of psychological tests, and then we make predictions based on averages and means and that sort of thing. The vast majority of people who have this psychological trait tend to do this thing. But there's a bunch of caveats on that because there aren't just 12 types of people. It's complex. It's very, very complex. Now, I'm a traditional astrologer, and the whole chart, in my opinion, is not the person. Pretty much it's just the first house. The other parts of the chart are things like your parents and your economic circumstances and the type of people you notice and therefore interact with. What you can and can't see, how you feel about higher education and your relationship with those ideas. So from that perspective, we're describing circumstances of birth. We're describing those things that we consistently see manifest and how they interact. Now, one very important part of all astrological practice is observe and correlate, because that's how astrology has been done for thousands of years. We observe the stars are doing these things and these things are happening, and we watch it again and again and again and again. And we go, okay, well, when Mars gets into Aries, people get aggressive, right? And a lot of that astrology is mundane astrology. Mundane astrology is for countries and big political movements and kings and that sort of thing. The big state level and larger stuff, because that has a flow also. So the answer is yes, there's free will, but it's not carte blanche. And yes, there's destiny, but it's not all controlling. And I kind of tend to believe it's not all controlling simply because we don't speak the language well enough to pick up on the details and variables we don't notice. So like in consultation with a client, I will usually go over several significant events that have happened in their life and what the astrological pictures looked like at the time. And they can tell me the exact details of how that manifested. And then I can say, okay, so probably when this configuration comes up again, it's going to sound like this experience. So, because I might not really get the complete complex picture because, oh my God, it's huge and it's deep. You can spend your entire lifetime studying one astrological chart and maybe get to where you got all of it. There's so much information in there. And so many layers and so many ways to understand this symbolic language. And I think it's really important we keep in mind that it is a symbolic language. And we're translating. And, you know, when you speak multiple languages, there are things you can say better in certain languages than others. And there are ideas you can't express because translation fails. You know, it makes sense over here, but not over here.
So basically with Fate and Free Will, it's a bit of both. I remember years ago, back in the Yahoo group days with Robin Artisan, I remember his debates and arguments about free will and fate. Because he's a hard fatalist. The way I always described it was that it's like you are on a little boat going down the river, and you can steer slightly to the left or slightly to the right, but you can't go at a 90-degree angle straight across to the bank, because then the current will just knock you over. So you've got to flow with the current, but you can make those tiny little decisions that affect the rest of your life. Because one decision then rolls over onto another one. So I guess it's the same thing with how our birth chart is created. We've got those little decisions we can make during life that affect the rest of it.
Well, in that analogy, astrology describes the river to you and the condition of your boat.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, if you have that information, especially if you know, 100 meters ahead, there's a 50-foot drop. That's some good information to have, maybe. You know,
bit of foresight. Yeah.
Right. So I think the fate versus free will, they aren't mutually exclusive. They're not necessarily opposites. It's not, oh, it's fated or, oh, it's free will. Because neither of them are experienced as black and white absolutes in our lives.
Okay. All right. Let me just go back over to chat. Sylvia. Hello, everyone. Hello, Sylvia. And thank you. She said hit the like button. That's nice. And Andrea's here. Hello, Lee and Revkai. By the way, if you've got any questions you want to ask, you better get them in now, because otherwise I'll end and everybody's going, oh, I want you to ask a question. All right. Let me just see what else I had here. Let me just ask this. You do birth charts for people, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do natal astrology and mundane astrology and horary and elective. So,
okay.
Natal astrology is a study of a birth of usually a person. We apply those sometimes to entities such as businesses and like nonprofit organizations, stuff like that. Mundane astrology is the astrology of countries, political movements, big, huge stuff, stock markets. Electional astrology is choosing the auspicious or right date for certain ventures. So looking in advance, selecting a good time to do things, a good time to start things. And then horary astrology is divination. You ask a question, you cast a chart, you interpret the chart, and get an answer. Just like reading the tarot cards. You ask a question, you do a spread, you interpret the spread, you get an answer.
Okay. So everybody knows where to go. If you want to chart, revkai.com. I'll actually put it in the link. I didn't put it in today. I'll put it in after this though. So if you do want to go to Revkai's site and get a chart, then just go into the description after the video and you'll get the link there. But it's easy. Revkai.com. Simple. Yeah, the whole thing about the mundane astrology. I mean, I understand that if you are doing a birth chart for somebody, then you would take their birth date, place, time, etc. How does that work with the world? You know, determining how things are moving.
So we watch transits. Transits are right now. Like if I say, oh, right this moment, Mercury is conjunct Jupiter in Aquarius, because it's happening right this minute.
Okay.
And compare those to different charts. There's a lot of charts that are involved, but it's the same idea that the birth of something gives it an imprint. So like a lot of people, when they predict presidential elections for the US, they compare it to the US natal chart, because that's the birth of that nation and how that energy flows. They also take the birth charts of the candidates and look at what is going on for them. Now, there's other things than transits that we use on natal charts, like progressions and zodiacal releasing and Fradaria and several other timing techniques that we use to determine when certain parts of the chart are activated, what planet's getting the most energy, which ones are being excluded, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of comparisons and putting things together and going, oh, well, this candidate is in a really prominent period where they're going to be highly visible, and they also have the, will of the people, and this candidate is also in a prominent period, but it doesn't last very long. So we might think, oh, well, this one's probably going to win because their prominence lasts longer. But we have to also compare that to other factors. So, it's looking at a lot of natal charts, but some of the interpretations are different. There are points in a chart for a kingdom. There are points in a chart for the populace. There are points in the chart for economic influence, for foreign countries, for wars. And yes, those points are all there in a personal native chart for a single individual, but we understand that symbolic language in a different way. The personal king is your daily boss, the person you answer to in order to survive. Whereas if we're looking at a country, then that spot is actually the leader of the country.
Yeah. And what his natal chart says goes. Everybody has to fit in.
Well, no. The leader's natal chart does not become the new chart of the country.
Yeah.
It's how that person is relating to what's going on in the energies. So there's a lot of layers involved, and the more people involved in running a country, the more charts and layers and energies and interactions are involved.
Okay. Andrea asked, how do you find your moon sign?
So it is the sign the moon is in at the time you were born. And really, if you just want to see your birth chart and you've never seen one before, you can go to astro-seek.com and put in your birth information and get a free chart. Astro.com is also highly recommended. AstroSeek is full of wonderful traditional tools, so it's the one I use the most, and want to give them a shout out because they're doing some amazing work for traditional astrologers. But,
Put that in the chat.
You get your natal chart, and I do offer to just straight up generate a chart for people when I teach classes and that sort of thing. That doesn't include interpretations. But you do need the day you were born, your birthday. You need the place you were born. You're going to need to know the longitude and latitude of it. That's how we determine place. And then you need the time you were born. And ideally, this should come from your birth certificate, because rounded times and family memories are notoriously terrible. And I use myself as an example. I have 2 sons. I was totally there for their births, I promise you. I was an astrologer when they were born. I was quite certain my oldest son was born in the wee hours of the morning, like around sunrise. He was born at 4:04 in the afternoon. And I was quite certain my second son was born in the middle of the night. He was born at 5:57 in the evening. So my awareness of time was not spot on while I was giving birth.
You've got other things to consider at the time, I assume.
Right. There's other stuff going on, and there is wisdom to be had in the family stories about when we were born and the circumstances going on and those impressions. And I think they're always important to be part of your birth information. But especially when we're talking about charts, check your birth certificate. Don't just go on mom's memory, because mom's memory has different priorities than looking at the clock and registering it. And also, you might have an astrologer talk to you sometimes about, well, I don't think this is actually the time you were born, because you're like really, really close to a change in rising signs. You're at one of those points where it's just about to change over, and it makes more sense to pop it into the next sign for the way your life experience has been, or to pop it into the previous sign. Because, you know, when a baby's being born, there's a lot of chaos going on. Not everybody gets a chance to look at the clock and call it. It might be a few minutes late. They might have rounded back a little bit, you know, born at 6:32 and the nurse wrote 6:30. So, and those 2 minutes might make a difference in rising sign. They don't make a difference in most of the other sign placements. It's just the houses. But if you don't know that information for any reason, that's fine. There is a process in astrology called rectification, where we take significant moments in your life, we figure out what those charts look like, we decode your symbolic language, and we figure out when you were born the most likely natal chart that matches your life experience. That's because these properties are transitive. They can go both ways. So I've had clients that were adopted out from a foreign country, and they didn't get any birth information, right? They're not even sure of the day they were born. They have a region that they were probably born in because of the orphanage. They definitely don't have a time. So I've done rectification for cases like that. I know some people that were born on the way to the hospital, like in rural Montana. So somewhere along this line of 100 miles, you know, and no idea of the time. Nobody stopped to check the time. They just got to the hospital as fast as they could, you know. So, and the time on their birth certificate is when they got there.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes we don't have birth certificates. Stuff goes missing, you know.
Yeah, mine's gone missing. That's why. I mean, my mother told me it was 4 p.m. That's all I know. I've got to try and apply for mine from England again. But that's a bit of a mission.
But it's important to tell your astrologer, this is my birth information and this is where I got it from. You know, it's my birth certificate, or, you know, this is the story that goes with it, or whatever, because that's all information that they can help you work through and sort out how that impacts your chart, which parts to take very seriously and which parts to go, maybe this is off a little bit. Maybe I need to look and see if it actually matches.
Okay. I'm just checking out somebody on a question. Sabrina, Is Jupiter supposed to be the lucky planet in the chart?
Well, it depends on whether you were born at day or at night. So Jupiter and Venus are the benefics, or the luck-giving planets. And during the day, when the sun is above the horizon, then Jupiter is the most lucky, or the greatest benefic, and Venus is the lesser benefic. Also lucky, but not as awesome. But at night, if the sun is below the horizon, those split places, and Venus becomes the most lucky, and Jupiter is good, but not as good as Venus. So Jupiter is often associated with being a very lucky planet because it is about abundance and growth, and it tends to magnify its contacts and give abundance and growth to the planets that it hosts.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, we've been going for an hour according to the clock over there, but my time seems to not be catching up.
We did have like 15 minutes of technology.
Yeah, no, but this specific live has been going for. Oh, right. Oh, that's the Jitsi one. Okay, hang on a sec. Let me just check this. It doesn't tell me. Oh, 41 minutes. Okay, so we haven't even been going for an hour yet. Rosie, how can getting an astrological chart done help?
Well, it depends on what you want to know and what kind of astrological chart you want. So if you want a natal chart, it can tell you about opportunities that are coming up, or times to be quiet and keep your head down, that sort of thing. Predicting when things are going to be a struggle and when things are going to be easy, that sort of thing. There's a lot to do in a natal chart. You can also go at it as a completely psychological interpretation and treat it like therapy, where I want to understand myself better and I want to learn how to relate to all parts of myself better. And this gives you a jumping off point to do that work, to begin in that symbolic language of the unconscious and get a spot to start digging around and find yourself. But then there's also horary astrology. If you just want to ask questions, where in the world is that box of my tax papers from 2017? I need it. I answer questions like that in horary astrology for myself also. But
where did I leave the cat last week?
Right. Hopefully not. But horary astrology rose to prominence in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance when people didn't have birth times. And so this is a way to interact with astrology that doesn't require your own natal information if that's not what you're interested in. And then there's elective astrology, like, hey, I really want to get married to this guy. I really want it to be focused around love, and he really wants it to be focused around communication. Help us pick a day that builds that into our relationship. So that has an element of magic in it, of electing when to do something based on how you want it to come out. And you can elect for big things like weddings. You can elect for smaller things like job interviews. And you can absolutely elect for doing magic. In fact, a lot of magic involves correct astrological timing. And how detailed you do that and how tightly you do that totally depends on what you want. But even timing things by the phases of the moon is astrological timing, because we're talking about the relationship between the sun and the moon, astrologically speaking. Planting by the moon is electional astrology. We plant when the moon is waxing and in fertile signs. That sort of thing. So there's a lot of ways to interact with astrology, and a lot of ways to use it as a tool to help you in your goals. It just depends on what your goals are and what you want to do with it. You don't have to go get a psychological modern astrology reading of your natal chart if that doesn't interest you. That's fine. It may be much more interesting to you to do money magic on Fridays because Venus is very prominent in your chart, and you're much more likely to get more wealth if you support that.
So it gives you a guide in that respect.
Information. It describes the river you're on, and the state of your boat. So, and I always feel that, especially as magicians and people who want to be better people and grow, more information is useful. We have more information to base our decisions on. We have more information about where we want to allocate resources and what we want to make priorities.
Okay, so the obvious conclusion question here would be the difference between Western and Vedic astrology. Bye, Andrea.
Vedic astrology is based on the Vedas and the observations from and traditions of Indian astrologers.
What makes it more accurate, though?
What?
What makes it more accurate?
More accurate.
Everybody keeps saying that Vedic astrology is more accurate than Western astrology.
Well, so they're different, and they speak different symbolic languages. Western astrology uses a tropical zodiac. In other words, if you go outside and you look up into the sky and you measure things out with your ascension and everything else, it's not necessarily going to line up with what the stars are actually out there doing and where the planets actually are. We're still going off of math, and we divide all of the signs evenly into exactly 30 degrees. So they're 12 equal sections of the pie, but they're not that way if you look up in the sky. Some signs are great big. Pisces is massive, and some are teeny tiny. Libra is short little spot. So Vedic astrology uses sidereal time and the sidereal zodiac, which is what's right out there. The signs are not divided evenly necessarily. There's some where they are and some where they aren't. But it's where the planet is if you go outside and you look. And tropical is not. However, the interpretations that go with those are not transitive. You can't take them outside of their system and put them in other places. The way that Vedic astrology interprets the nodes of the moon and the mansions of the moon is different because it's based on a different calculation method. So Western astrology is accurate as long as it's used within its system and the calculations it's based on, and it still matches the energies it's describing. Vedic astrology is accurate as long as it's used within the systems that it's based on, because it's still describing the observation of the energies. They're both observing energies, they're just dicing them up a little differently, and that results in different descriptions. What some people definitely resonate better with the language of Vedic astrology or with the language of traditional astrology or modern Western astrology. And I mean, that's true no matter which symbolic language we're speaking. Some people resonate better with tarot, and some people would rather read runes, and some people find an oracle deck that speaks to them. That doesn't mean one form of divination is absolutely more accurate for everyone than any other. It's what language do you already speak, and what can you easily understand and translate.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I'm all out of questions, and nobody else has got questions. So I think we'll end this one here today. I just want to apologize again for the mishap at the beginning. We were trying to do it through OBS, which didn't play very nicely, but we'll try and get that sorted out for next week so the screen looks a bit better. You can see both of us at the same time. It would be fantastic. I was going to say something. Oh, yeah. So if you need a chart, you know where to go to, revkai.com. I'm actually going to just quickly put that in the chat as well, so that you've got it. There's no dash or anything, is there?
Nope. REBKAI.com.
There we go. All right, so that's in the chat, so everybody's got that. And next week we will be live again with a very, very interesting topic. I'm not going to tell you what it is, though.
I don't know.
Yeah, we were actually discussing this because Kai has a box full, well, actually lots and lots of boxes apparently full of index cards with topics. So what we were thinking of doing was actually just coming onto the live and doing a potluck. This is the topic that we're talking about today.
Pop quiz. Tell me everything you know about mudras.
Yeah, I think we should get a bit of preparation first, though. Okay, all right, we're going to go then. Bye, Rosie. And bye, everybody else.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good weekend, and I'll see you all next week. Cheers.